Hello crafty friends, I'm Lean from Studio Kato and I am back with yet another clean and simple Christmas card tutorial. I am going to show you four cards, not three, but four cards today, and they're all featuring the same die set. And I wanted to make this video just to show you how versatile this die set is. Obviously, you can make a ton of more involved cards as well, but I like to keep my Christmas cards clean and simple, that way I can make more of them. So this is that beautiful versatile die set I was talking about. It's the Christmas Bird Poinsettia die set from Spellbinders, and I thought up my card ideas before I started assembling them, and I just cut all of the pieces in preparation, even my card panels and things like that, and I just put them off to the side so I could do all the assembling all at once. Now I'm actually going to start by making my sentiments. This is the Christmas Die and Glimmer sentiments set, and it is so fun to use. So there's a component that is Glimmer, that's the sub-sentiment to these sentiments, and then you have the larger word, which is a die cut, and you also have a shadow die for each full sentiment. So you have the Glimmer portion and the scripty die cut all on the same shadow die, and it's just a really fun effect. So I wanted to show you how these come together. They're really easy. All you have to really account for is the space you need for that shadow die. So you want to glimmer first, and I am glimmering everything with polished brass hot foil, and I did glimmer almost everything on white, but one of the sentiments is going on a craft card, so I thought that would look best on craft cardstock as well. I adhered the sentiments with some best ever craft tape just to keep everything in place, and they all foiled wonderfully. I did have some overfoiling on one, but I'll show you just in a second how I took care of that. It's really easy. All I needed was a little sand eraser from, I think this is from Mono, but you can find a ton of sand erasers. Now, the next thing I do is I line up the shadow layer dies, and I have already die cut the scripty layer dies. I die cut those from white cardstock first and from gold glitter cardstock as well, and I stacked those up, layered those up already. I'll show you how those come together at the end of this card, but first let's assemble the first card. And I went with the first focal image from this die set, which is the Christmas bird. And I love birds on cards. I think they're such a versatile subject of a card, and usually when they're flying around, they add a lot of movement to your design anyway. But there's something about birds and Christmas cards that just works. So even though this is a stationary bird, I think it's gorgeous for this card. Now first I ink blended a backdrop with some white pigment ink on craft cardstock. I love the look of that. It adds a little bit of a glow. And to add some more of a snow effect to that, I just splattered on some watered down acrylic paint. I think my most used supply on winter themed cards has to be white acrylic paint these days. It's such a good way to add white splatter. It's just opaque enough, and it always goes on like butter. To assemble this bird, there are a couple of layers to this, but I just die cut them out of various shades of blue. And if you just stick to one color family, that usually works out, because I definitely struggle a little bit with layering dies like this, where it's not super clear which layer is supposed to be darker. Like with layering flower dies, you know that the base layer has to be the lightest, and the more towards the center you go of the flower, it's usually darker. For a bird like this, with pieces like this, it's a little bit difficult to figure out which one should be which color. It might be easier to just color it after it's assembled. That could be fun too. But if you stick to one color family, usually it just works out. So I assembled that, And then I also cut 2 of the branches from this die set. So there is a ton of greenery in this die set as well. Obviously, you can make a fun wreath with that too. Again, that's a little bit more involved. I wanted to keep things simple, show you some simple ideas today. But yeah, you can definitely make a wreath out of the greenery in this die set, and that will be another fun design for this die set. I really love this die set. If that wasn't clear yet, it's a really good investment because you get so many fun different pieces. You'll see them all throughout this video. I am propping that bird up on some foam tape so it definitely sticks up from behind the branches. And then I'm going to do the same for the sentiment. And as you can see, I put my foam tape on some baking paper. Parchment paper will work as well. Any kind of release paper that will make it easier to trim it down into tiny little pieces. For my next card, I'm going to be using the Poinsettia from this die set, but I'm going to start out with my background. I'm using the new Vintage Ornaments 3D embossing folder from Spellbinders, and I am going to emboss this on some very light colored blue cardstock. I know it looks white on the video, it's just very pale blue. I dampened the cardstock just a little bit, and that will loosen the fibers of the paper, and you'll get a better embossing result, especially for 3D embossing folders. Usually you'll get some tearing if you don't use water. Now I'm also using the Essential Modern ovals. I just cut a few layers of those. So a larger one out of white and darker blue cardstock that will essentially be my frame here, and then a smaller one from the same pale blue cardstock that I used for the background. I am going to assemble this, and I did want to note something as well about the 3D embossing folder that I didn't have time for a second ago, but you probably noticed that I cut my panel a lot larger than I needed it to be before it went through the embossing folder. That is because some cardstocks, not all, but some, will sort of shrink when they go through a 3D embossing folder because it adds so much dimension. So you want to keep that in mind because it won't shrink evenly usually. So you'll probably end up with a panel that looks like you cut it wrong or you measured it wrong. You didn't, it just shrunk. So just keep that in mind. I always trim my panels when I want to emboss them a little bit larger before I emboss them, and I just trim them down later. That also helps to even out the edges, by the way, because usually those edges from a 3D embossed panel, they look a little bit wonky. So that second card with the poinsettia was very quick and easy to assemble, so I thought I'd step it up for the third card design. I really wanted to make a card with just the candy cane as a focal point, and I struggled a little bit, but in the end I decided to just cut a bunch of candy canes and assemble them all, put some foam tape behind them, and just make a background out of them, and that worked out really fun. Now, I do have to admit, I didn't keep in mind that all of the candy canes, because there's only one die in this die set that cuts a candy cane, are bent the same way. I think building a background would be a lot easier if there was a mirror image involved somehow. However, there wasn't, and I made do. So it was a little bit more of a struggle than I thought it would be to build a background out of these candy canes, but in the end it worked out. I put some foam tape behind these. I built a background, and I do know that I have a couple of open spaces left, and I am just going to trim off the excess around the edges of this fun card panel and use those excess pieces to fill up some of the gaps around the edge of the card. Now, if you're building a background like this, it's a lot easier if you start building your background from the center. I did that, if you noticed. I've learned the hard way how difficult it can be to fill up the center at the end, especially when you have large images like these candy canes. It's very easy to fill up the edges, but the center you will probably struggle. So start in the center and then work your way outwards. I'm going to add one more of those fun Christmas dye and glimmer sentiments. I really like these. This one is Making Spirits Bright, and it's just a really, really beautiful font. I love the Spellbinders sentiments usually. Now, there were a lot of gaps in this pattern because the image is so large, so I filled them all up with a ton of jewels. These are from Pinkfresh. These are the Glacier jewels, and they just have a really fun icy look to them. Now, my fourth card is probably the cleanest and the simplest of all, and I am pulling in a different glimmer set for this. Now, like I mentioned before, with the greenery in that poinsettia or Christmas bird and poinsettia die set, you can definitely build a wreath, but that takes a lot of die cutting, a lot of effort, and most importantly, a lot of time, which we don't have for Christmas cards. So instead, I decided to foil this leaf from the Sealed Swag Glimmer set. And you can see that I'm trimming around my foil, by the way, because if you have an image like this that leaves a lot of corners of your foil open, you'll most likely get some overfoiling where those corners of the foil are just flapping about without a plate on top of them. So just trim those off and round off the corners, and that will help a lot against overfoiling. I'm just going to heat that up and pass that through my die cutting machine. And then I'm going to talk again about how I put this card together, because I really wanted to make a wreath card, but I wanted to keep it simple. So I have this Sealed Swag wreath. It's not a complete wreath, but it's really fun and detailed. And I thought just foiling that in gold on a white card panel would be gorgeous. And then you can just add a little bit of greenery to this. I chose the holly leaves that are in the Christmas bird and poinsettia die set. And it will look like you put a ton of effort into it. I mean, maybe not to a card maker. They'll know it was a little bit quicker than to die cut all of the leaves instead. But yeah, it looks like a complete wreath, but without having to die cut a full wreath. And I love it. I am probably going to mass produce this design. If I run out of Christmas cards, I am definitely going to make more of this one. It was very quick to make. Now, I did make a mistake. I glued down the holly leaves a little bit too early because I wanted to trim down this panel to leave a nice white margin all the way around the smaller panel. And I completely forgot to do that before I adhered down the holly leaves. So I had to finagle them out of the way of my trimmer for a little bit. But I mean, I managed. It worked out in the end. It's fine. I'm going to bag that panel with a piece of cardboard. It's a great way to recycle, and more importantly, it's also a great way to add light dimension to your card. So this is very, very sturdy dimension. It's a lot sturdier than foam tape, but it is lighter than stacking a bunch of pieces of cardstock together like a lot of people do. I used to do that, and my cards weighed a ton. I always had to add extra postage, and no one has the money for that. So instead I switched to cardboard, to some recycled cardboard packaging, and that does the trick beautifully. Now, these are all the finished cards. I really, really love the wreath one. And obviously the candy canes add a ton of color to that white background. I didn't even mention it, but you probably saw I cut them out of blue as well, and I thought that was really fun. I stuck to some really classic Christmas color combinations too, because this collection is called Classic Christmas, and the designs in it definitely reflect that, and I wanted my cards to reflect that too. So these are all the cards. I really like all of them. The wreath one was definitely the quickest one to make, but overall I really only spent an hour putting all of these together. And I am a slow crafter, by the way. I want everything to be nice, but also I want to enjoy myself. So I take my time, I put on some music, and I just take my time with every little piece. So you can definitely make these quicker, especially if you already have the ideas ready and if you're just mass producing a few of these designs. The die cutting did take me about 20 minutes extra, but other than the die cutting, I spent an hour assembling all of these cards. So I think I made pretty good time. And let me know which card was your favorite and which one you might want to mass produce for your Christmas card collection. I hope you liked the cards. I hope you liked the video. If you did, make sure to leave a thumbs up on this video. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to tell me which one is your favorite. And yeah, definitely subscribe to see more of my next videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.